It's interesting coming out of the for-profit sector because nobody asks what Microsoft's overhead is, right? They just ask how good are your products, right? And do I want to use your products? I would love to see the equivalent on the nonprofit side, which really comes back to impact.
How's it going, y'all? My name is Justin. Welcome to the circuit where we sit down with members of local nonprofits to talk about what is working well in their field and to learn a little bit more about their stories and where they're coming from. Today, I am joined by Paul Shultz, who is the executive director of the Martha's Vineyard Community Foundation. Welcome, Paul. Thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me, Justin. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm super excited to have this conversation. We've been talking to a lot of executive directors and members of leadership at local island nonprofits. And it seems like from the Community Foundation, you have little avenues into a lot of different organizations. So it's going to be kind of cool to hear a bird's eye view of what's going on. And in the impact space, what you're seeing is working really well.
But you bet it. Excited.
I'd love to take a step back first and just hear a little bit about you and how you got into this world. Have you always been in the nonprofit space, or did you fall into that?
No, I fell into it in my 40s, actually. So I was in business for the first 20 years of my career and reasonably happy, but there was something missing and I couldn't quite put my finger on it. But when I started joining nonprofit boards and found really effective, fun nonprofits, something clicked that was different than the businesses that I had worked in. And so I thought to myself, gosh, if I could apply these same business skills and acumen that I've picked up, but do it for a bigger mission. And that's what the nonprofits provide. That would be really sweet. And so I switched in my 40s to running Red Cross for Los Angeles and have not looked back since then.
That's very cool. So you felt like you had this thing that was missing. And then I heard two interesting things. One, that you brought your business expertise into the nonprofit space. What were some of the big differences that you saw, both positive and maybe some things that weren't as positive?
Yeah, let's see. Probably the biggest change that I had to adjust to was in the working environments I'd been in. I had one boss for 20 years. It was just one boss at a time. And what's so different in the nonprofit world, especially when you're the executive director, is you often have 20 or more bosses because it's the board. And so that was a big change, getting used to working for a board as opposed to working for one individual. Second really big change that I saw working for direct services like Red Cross is it's driven by volunteers. So working with, attracting, retaining, deploying volunteers is very different than for paid employees. So getting used to that volunteer world was a big change for someone coming out of the for-profit world.
Yeah, that makes a lot more sense. There's a lot more players, both above you and below you, that you need to manage. And I'm sure that comes with its own suite of challenges and difficulties,
it
right?
Does.
Bringing all those
it's
people
really
together.
Interesting. I think in some ways, though, it was aspirational leadership for a lot of the for-profit companies, because what I've seen evolve over the 40 years I've been involved in business is a real movement away from, in most cases, top-down management, dictation from above, to empowering really smart, motivated employees who are going to go get it done once they understand what the mission is and what the goals are. Well, in nonprofits, you really have that in spades because the volunteers could leave at any time if they're not motivated, if they don't feel connected to the mission. So in some ways, it's an advance, I think, of what many for-profit companies are doing today by empowering the front line. But that's been done for decades by nonprofits.
That's interesting. Did you find that you were bringing a lot of the skills and values that you learned in the corporate world over to the nonprofit world? Like, was there an easy transfer, or was it a whole new set of leadership skills?
I thought in some ways it was a really easy transition. Some of the basics of you're running an organization, the organization has to make enough money to fulfill its mission. So you've got to look into revenue streams, right? Where's your revenue coming from? How reliable is it? Do you have things outside of donations? Because you know it's so helpful if you have multiple revenue streams and don't just rely on one. And your largest nonprofits have that. So Hospitals charge patient fees. Universities charge students. These are some of the biggest fundraisers, but that can go down to the smallest nonprofit as well. Do you have other streams? Do you have membership? Are you providing a service you could charge for, even though it might be subsidized? So really looking at, when I say the business side of it is, can you support the mission you've got financially? And can you be savvy about where that revenue is going to come from, and then be really strict about where your costs are going?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's cool to hear of kind of diversifying where the money is coming in, because what I'm hearing is if you get too pigeonholed in one area, that kind of limits you in having security and being able to actually complete your mission.
It's so hard. You know, where I saw that was my very first board was Big Brothers Big Sisters, which I love being on that board. But by the third year, I was completely burned out. And what I didn't realize until I had joined other boards was we had a $2 million budget every year in LA. We would start January 1st and we'd have $0 in. Obviously, we weren't charging the little brothers and the little sisters, and we weren't charging their parents. These were low income. But what it meant was you had to go out and raise $2 million every year in fundraising. And when you're a board and you don't have an endowment, that's a lot of money to raise, and it put the weight on the board every single year to go do that. And that's hard going if you don't have a diversified revenue stream.
Yeah, absolutely. And I could see how that would cause a lot of burnout. It's something that I hear and that we've actually had conversations about on this podcast, is this idea of burnout in the nonprofit space. It seems that it's not a new thing or even a rare thing. People who really care about missions and care about doing work in specific communities can be really challenging, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Having been in that world for so long, are there ways that you mitigate your own burnout, or you would encourage people to look at keeping themselves their cups full?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there is a real sea change through COVID. COVID was devastating on a lot of nonprofits, trying to fulfill that mission when you couldn't be in person and you had to do things remote, and you had to develop a whole new set of systems that you may not have had before. So that was incredibly challenging on a lot of the workforce, not just in healthcare, but really across the board. And then certain industries were just shellacked. Think of theater and live programming. So as a result of that, if I look at the 2 years since really the almost shutdown of 2020 and 2021, there's been a lot of emphasis on self-care and healthcare and mental health care, and making sure that you're able to take time out, invest in yourself. And I've seen a really big movement of that within the organizations to make sure that people are taking care of themselves, that they have the appropriate amount of time off, that the hours worked are reasonable where you can make them reasonable, and that you really do get breaks. So I think it does depend on the individual organization, but I've seen a huge awareness of that the last couple of years, which has been very refreshing.
Yeah, that's huge to hear, because it's a double-edged sword, right? If you care so much about something, obviously you're going to want to put your heart and soul into it. But when that becomes detrimental to the amount of work getting done, it's like, okay, we need to take a step back and look at it. So it's good to hear that there's more of a culture of that.
Yeah, I think so.
It sounds like you get to work with a lot of different nonprofits in the community foundation role. Could you tell me a little bit about what a community foundation is and how you operate?
Sure. Well, community foundation, there's hundreds of community foundations across the U.S. They're typically anywhere from about 100 years old to within the last few years. And basically, they are there to make a geographic area better than it would be without them. So in our particular case, we were completely focused on Martha's Vineyard. And the mission is making the vineyard a better place, which is an incredibly broad mission, but that's what all community foundations try and do. They try and make that place better than it would be if they didn't exist.
I love that. And you're saying better. Are there different areas that you like to focus in? Like, what does better mean to you?
Yeah, absolutely. there's a number of different programs we run that focus in particular areas. So the first one, which was started over 40 years ago, is scholarships for graduating high school seniors. We've broadened that to those that are still in college and also trades now as well, because there's a very active community here that doesn't go to college, but they're actively working on the island. But that scholarship fund, that was our first fund that was set up 40 years ago. And we've gotten to the point now where we're promoting over $300,000 worth of scholarships every year. And that goes to over 100 recipients. So that good over time, particularly if someone wants to improve their education, has been really fruitful. In addition to the scholarships, we provide annual grants. So this year we provided over $400,000 in grants to almost 40 nonprofit organizations on the Vineyard. So we're able to look at not only the nonprofits, but the projects that they'd like to promote and look at those that we feel are most worthy. And that's a tough challenge because we got over $900,000 worth of requests and we had to winnow that down to $400,000. So it's a very challenging role, but you can find those areas of opportunity in those programs that we think will most benefit the island. So we're continually looking at how to make this a better place. And those are two of the programs. We have several others as well.
Between the scholarships and all these different nonprofits, you're casting a really wide net into the community and having impact in lots of different ways. Mm-hmm. I'd love to focus on the scholarships just for a second. What is the importance in your mind of supporting the next generation? How does that uplift a whole community?
Well, education is such a critical part of not only a person's well-being, but also their ability to advance in their career. And given how expensive the Vineyard is now, it really pays to have some skills that you can translate in the marketplace to sustain yourself in a place like the Vineyard. So we feel like education is a critical component in allowing students to get those skills. And there's such a gap now between what the colleges, universities are charging versus what a typical middle-income family has, that they really need a lot of support, both from the colleges, but also from scholarships that can be provided. So we feel like we're doing our piece in promoting our scholarships, but we're also so glad to see so many other scholarship providers that are available and giving out money at the Tabernacle on that scholarship night.
That's really cool. And hopefully that's something that comes full circle, right? If you put that investment into the next generation, exactly like you said, they're going to be able to go out, get skills, gain interest, and then hopefully come back and just pump those back into the community, which feels very full circle to me, which is cool.
Which is also one of the reasons we're so keen on promoting promotion through the trades. Because there's a lot of high school seniors who don't go to college. They often will join their parents in the trade that their parents are doing, and incredibly valuable. But if you can get a license, a plumber's license, electrician's license, there's so many skills here that are highly desired, and some of them pay very well. But you have to go through some continuing education to get there. So it's also where ACE-MV and some of the other programs that encourage those type of courses play such a critical role in the community.
That's awesome. And if you can be the missing piece to just get the funding in there, you have the excited student and you have the place where they can go to gain those skills.
Exactly.
You just bring them all together.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then it's such an interesting island because we had a lot of kids who were interested in maritime, which would not be true. I don't think it certainly wasn't true in LA, but it's a big interest here. And so being able to provide scholarships for a maritime academy, which again can have some incredible careers for a lot of these kids who just love the water and they want to do something related to that.
That's awesome. Well, it's very cool that you're not only focusing on that side of providing scholarships and building up the next generation, but you're also looking at the nonprofits on the island. What are some of the ones that you're excited about, and where do you really see the needle being moved?
Oh boy, there's so many. I mean, one of the things that's interesting when we look at all the nonprofits across the Vineyard, there are over 300 nonprofits on Martha's Vineyard. That is 2.5 times more than you would find in Massachusetts on a per capita basis. So there's something in the water here where people want to start a nonprofit. Sometimes funders get a little frustrated with that because there are so many and they are asking for support. But the flip side of that is It means that people care tremendously about Martha's Vineyard, and a number of them create what I call passion projects. Their passion project is their nonprofit. It's a way of giving back to the vineyard. They take very few resources. They don't have a paid executive director. Everyone's volunteer, but they're trying to make something better in this community. And that's probably 200 of the 300 are in that camp. So I love the fact that there's such a strong civil society here, and I think the nonprofits really play a huge part of that. One of the big trends, when we asked the different sectors across the nonprofit categories what their biggest issue was, the answer was interesting. It didn't matter if they were environmental causes, if they were healthcare causes, if they were working on food security. The number one issue across all of those sectors was affordable housing. Number one issue. And they were feeling that because they were having trouble keeping staff on the island to support the mission that they wanted to deliver. So I think when we look at the last few years and currently today, housing is just a massive issue that affects everyone and every institution, and not just the nonprofits. You see it on the for-profits, you see it with the schools, you see it with the other institutions. So it's an incredibly large challenge that we're facing right now. A second one that we see a lot of is food security, interestingly. So we have been able to partner with the government and get food security grants for the past 2 years. And there's a lot of requirements that come along with that. But IGI and Boys and Girls Club were both able to run the information gauntlet and be able to provide consistent meals over the past 2 years. And we've been able to funnel $2.5 million to IGI and Boys and Girls Club to help with food security. So that's also a major issue on the island.
It's a bummer that that is the way that it is. And I'm curious your thoughts on this, because I think one thing that I've heard in the nonprofit world is that when people want to support nonprofits, they have this resistance towards the overhead, towards keeping the team housed, keeping the team fed, keeping the team employed. When in actuality, I think what we're seeing is that when you invest into the team of a nonprofit, it can really go a long way. What are your thoughts on funding a direct program versus funding maybe some of the more overhead costs? Does it have an impact?
Yeah, well, it's interesting coming out of the for-profit sector because nobody asks what Microsoft's overhead is, right? They just ask how good are your products, right? And do I want to use your products? I would love to see the equivalent on the nonprofit side, which really comes back to impact. What impact are you having? I'd much rather look at the resources required to deliver the impact that you're having rather than what can sometimes be a very artificial separation of overhead versus direct service.
It's refreshing to hear, like, let's just go down to the ground level. Like, what is happening? What is changing? How are you moving the needle? What is the impact? Being somebody who sees a lot of reports on what nonprofits are doing, what are some of the most effective ways that impact is measured and communicated?
It really starts with the basics. You want to look at, as they carve out their mission and what they're trying to serve, asking very basic questions around that. Like, is it well defined? Does it define a group or a category that is specific? Can they tell you how many are in that category?
In terms of the storytelling aspect, where do you see the role in content and media and capturing what's going on with these nonprofits? Do you see that as an important factor?
Critical. Absolutely critical. I've always felt that there's really a three-legged stool when it comes to nonprofits, and they all either play well together or they take away from each other. The first leg is programs and services. What is your mission and what are you here to do, and how are you delivering that program or that service? The second element is the revenue aspect of that, because you've got to pay for that. So it can definitely be fundraising, but hopefully you have some other revenue streams as well. The third is marketing communications. The community needs to know, your donors need to know, your clients need to know what it is you're doing. And I think those three legs play really well together, and they reinforce each other if you're doing it well. If you're not doing it well, then you're in a situation where people haven't heard of you. Well, then they're not going to support you if they haven't heard of you. And how would even the clients know to come to inquire about your service? So I would consider it one of the three most important things for a nonprofit.
I love that visual of the three-legged stool of having strong programming, focus on revenue, and then media and content to capture and tie it all together. And they really do interact. You can get them into this like beautiful trifecta where they're all supporting each other. That's awesome. Well, this community foundation work sounds like you're doing some really amazing things in this local island. And before we wrap up, I'd love to go high level for a second. Just in your whole view of the nonprofit world, having seen big city to small rural community, unfortunately, the way our society is set up is there's been gaps that are left in terms of services that need to be provided to people, and nonprofits can come and fill a lot of those gaps. But then you're in this weird situation where you're trying to fundraise from a system that has created the gaps that you're trying to fundraise for. So it's a little bit of like a weird situation to be in.
Yeah.
What is your hope for the future of the nonprofit world? Like, are you an optimist when it comes down to it? Like, can we keep this ship going in a right direction, you think?
I think we're incredibly lucky here on Martha's Vineyard. When I think about the nature of this island, when I think about the civil society, when I think about the kindness and the support, and particularly when difficult things happen, and we've seen a number of those the last few months in terms of really tragic deaths and other things that just really hit you to the core, this community responds and it comes together. And I think to me, that is a great model for this country and for this world, is how can you do that? And yes, it does rely heavily on nonprofits. I think there is a lot of support that is delivered here on this island that's delivered through nonprofits, and it's a critical part of the support network. Personally, I think there's trade-offs when that support comes from government. I would love to see effective programs from the government help deal with some of those issues. So there's a role to play in housing. There's a role to play in food security. I feel like in some ways the country's had a long ongoing debate about this in terms of what services the government provides. But if they're effective and if they're critical, I think they can make a huge difference in people's lives.
In a world that can feel very overwhelming and like it's not approachable to look at these complex challenges, it's like there are people out there who are doing good work, and there's the ability to grow that work over time. So thank you for shedding light on it and bringing it in. I'd love to give you the floor if you have any other, programs or things that you want to hit on while we have this. Feel free.
One thing that community foundations are noted for is endowments. They're one of the few nonprofits that build up endowments over time. So we have that ability to permanently endow, making Martha's Vineyard a better place. And you can do that right at the community foundation. So it's the ability to, in most cases, put it in an estate or a will. So it's planning after you've passed. That's where most of our big donations have come from. So it's not anything out of pocket right now. It's when you're settling your estate. And if you want to give some of that back to the magic of Martha's Vineyard, we've had dozens of donors over years who have put that into their estate plan. And they currently give back to scholarships, they give back to grants, they give to key initiatives. They absolutely make this a better place, even though the donor is not here anymore. So that's something special that I think community foundations are particularly good at.
Absolutely. And for anybody out there listening or watching, we'll put all the links in the description of how they can get in touch with you and get their estate going towards something really, really amazing.
Fantastic. And we're launching a campaign for that. Our Island Planned Giving Society, we're launching in 2024. So there'll be a lot more news on that to come.
Amazing. Well, thank you, Paul, for sitting down. I really appreciate you taking the time and getting the word out there about what the Community Foundation is doing and just the overall nonprofit space in general. I think we have a lot to be hopeful for going into the new year.
Thanks so much, Justin. Nice to meet you.
Awesome. This has been an episode of The Circuit. You can find out more information in the links and descriptions below, but we've got an incredible group of people doing some really amazing community-oriented work. So we'd love to be in touch, and feel free to reach out. Thanks for tuning in.